I'd like to welcome everyone to our second lecture in the 2017 Wilderness Issues Lecture Series, which is titled Our Map of the World, Defining Our Future Based on Lessons Learned in the Past. Last week we had a really interesting discussion by Dr. Robin Parent, who took us on a journey through 3 different dystopian novels as a way to understand society's value of wild nature, wilderness, but also more broadly how we take both these ideas of what we consider the ultimate worst or the ultimate best and how they actually kind of play out and mimic what's actually happening in society. So this week we're going to continue with our theme with a discussion by Dr. Kimberly Maynard, which is going to further explore the theme of understanding events in the past that shape our contemporary culture and drive our actions into the quickly approaching future. We're going to move from dystopian environments to those of warfare and conflict in our real world, which we may draw in some ways some similarities. And the themes, of course, are united on the common ground of using multiple lenses throughout this whole lecture series from which to craft our ideas of environmental and social consciousnesses as we think about our past, our present, and our future. So to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Kimberly Maynard has lived and worked in conflict-affected countries in the Balkans, Central America, Central Asia, the former Soviet republics, South and East Asia, the Great Lakes region, the Horn of Africa, West Africa, and North Africa. She's UM's first Mansfield Fellow in International Affairs and works part-time with the U.S. Agency for International Development's Office of Transition Initiatives. Dr. Maynard has also served with non-governmental organizations, the Red Cross, the United Nations agencies, the World Bank, and private firms. Her work in crisis management, conflict recovery, and peace building straddles the gulfs between thinking and doing and between what exists and new possibilities. For 30 years, she has worked in the heart of disasters, civil wars, supporting their transition from crisis to peacetime and renewal. She researches, writes, speaks, and engages directly in revitalizing war-torn communities through local collaboration. Her work includes such issues as community-driven recovery, civil society's role in reconstruction, citizen participation in local governance, and measuring the impact of international initiatives, among others. She's currently exploring how change manifests, including leadership, trends, attraction, and participatory processes. She holds a doctorate in international affairs and is the author of numerous publications, including Healing Communities in Conflict, International Assistance in Complex Emergencies. I had the opportunity to read pieces of her book as well as a few reviews that were out there, and I thought one quote from one of the reviews of Dr. Maynard's book was particularly poignant for times that we find ourselves in right now. The quote is, "Of particular interest to the social work profession is Maynard's discussion of the ramifications of such emergencies for all sectors of the society: political, economic, and food security, health, vulnerable populations, psychosocial distress, human rights, and environmental devastation. One of the severe and lasting consequences of such emergencies is forced migration. Movements of large numbers of uprooted people fleeing ethnic cleansing, human rights violations, persecution, forced relocation, and other threats to security. This sets the stage for a comprehensive discussion of the process of repatriation, the decision-making process, and the often thorny reintegration issues that may accompany the return." End quote. So if we think about that quote, there's probably a lot of ways in which the natural environment and basic needs of humans relate to what's happening right now in the world. Tonight, Dr. Maynard's talk, Building Anew, a holistic approach to post-war recovery, will focus on rebuilding after conflict. It is based on the observations that our past has often led our post-war recovery efforts to rebuild the same systems that originally precipitated the conflict, meaning that most of our wars that have been fought in this millennium were rekindled from earlier conflicts that had already been had over very similar issues. So, if we consider this lesson in the future under the lens of the topic of this year's lecture series, we could use it to focus instead on building new from what we know of the old, and instead create a new vision for what something can become after, say, a conflict, when you have a clean slate from which to build. So I think, to me, this can be applied to many lenses, including that of the environmental lens, through which much of our lecture series has often focused. So with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Maynard to tonight's lecture series.
Gotta get all my wiring in place here. So, question to you is, how many of you have had at least one significant conversation over the past month about divisions in our society? Right. This is a major topic of our time, isn't it? So I'm talking about wars, and if you were to say, what is the largest example of division, what would it be? Pretty much when we kill each other, right? That's going to be the time when we're saying, okay, you are over here and I'm over here. So, and we're seeing this today. Syria, obviously, big issue. Within Syria, you've got the people within the rebel group itself who are all divided. You've got the Assad regime, you have ISIS, you have just that within that context. And then outside of that, of course, the refugees who are coming out, causes divisions within Europe, within our place. So there's just this huge thing. We're just dividing up into smaller and smaller entities all the time. So taking that, as this is kind of the notion of, this is one of the largest ways that we show our division in society throughout history, is by wars and by killing each other. We're going to take that as a premise. And I'm going to start off with a little visualization. So we're going to go back to an actual event. It was Ivory Coast, 2011. You don't have to close your eyes because we're going to have some pictures on this, but I'm going to just show you. Okay, so Ivory Coast, 2011. There had been a war. You had to aim it just right. There we go. There'd been a war mostly over regime change. Somebody ran for election, made it in, and much like Gambia recently, if you've been paying attention, the loser was not willing to let go of his seat as president and allow the new president to come in under a different political party and different ethnic support. So war broke out yet again in Ivory Coast, lasted not all that long, but it was significant. Lots and lots of people fled. People went internal displacement, meaning they were usually attacked and then leave and go to a place within the country, relatives or neighbors or somebody often aligned with the same ethnic group or political entity or religion, or they fled and went into Liberia. So if you picture the Ivory Coast fleeing west into Liberia, many people did that. So you're going to play the role of a 20-year-old woman who, the day that the rebels came in, took over her village, she fled with about 30 other people into the bush. Now you're out there in the bush for 4 months. You have your baby with you, and while you're there, you give birth to another baby, as do several other women who are with you. You have probably about 30 people altogether. You're struggling to survive. You're trying to find anything you can eat. There's a few wild animals, a few deer, some roots. Really rough life. I mean, it's really hard. Some people don't survive. Now, the political issues have been solved for the most part. The old president was arrested and taken away. The new president has stepped into power. And ostensibly, it's free and clear for you to come home. And so you do. So you and your band of people who you've been out in the bush with come back to your village. And this is what you see. This is your husband, and this is your house. So you walk up, and you spent years working on this house, painting, building. Your family had helped you build it. This is the place where you had lived, and this is the very first thing you walk up to. And as you tour around the village, you start seeing other things. You see more destruction. Can you see that very well? Is that not very? Let's see. Okay, how's that? You don't need to look at your husband again. You know what he looks like. So rubble all around. This is some other houses. As you walk around and you see these, there's a few houses that were not destroyed, but many of them look like this. A lot of burning. Some of the structures are falling down. You're walking around, and it's a devastating view. Some of the wells have been poisoned. You can't get water. There's been hate messages written on the walls of some of the houses. And you're talking about a pretty small village here, so it was very targeted and very direct. Some of the electrical wiring was pulled out. Why does somebody do that? And you see, as you go around, there's an open yard, sort of an open space in the center of the community, and you see this woman, and she's sitting there. She's been comforted by her granddaughter, but in the middle of this yard is this chair, and this is where her husband had been killed the day that they fled, and the chair is still there, flipped over. The chair is still there, and she's sitting there looking at it and crying. And so one of the leaders, the mayor had been killed, but one of the leaders calls a gathering, says, hey, after everybody sort of walked around and saw what they had to deal with, they come back together and they form a circle, they sit on the ground, and they start talking about what they're going to be doing. And these are some of the other young women. Some of them had given birth in the bush as well as you. And you come in, and the leader starts ranting and just angry at these people who'd gone to Liberia, because those people in Liberia are taken care of by the United Nations. So the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, he said, you guys were getting fed, you had shelter, you had medicine, you even had schools. I mean, look at us. We're so skinny, we've been eating roots, we haven't had anything. And a young man stands up and says, that's not the case. I was in Liberia. There's other young men like me over there. We want to come home, but we had a really rough time. We did not have food. We did not have places to live. We were struggling, trying to be taken care of by Liberians. And so the essence is you feel this tension. You feel what is going on. And you, as a young mother, are saying, oh my gosh, how are we going to live? What are we going to do with all of this tension? We have no idea what we're going to do. Our crops are destroyed. Our houses are destroyed. The school is even destroyed. We don't know if we can trust our neighbors. This place is in this devastation and very, very delicate conditions. And what happens next? So the tension and the anger and the fear are just ripe, right? Okay, so shake that off. Come back to Missoula. Everything's okay. Good. But the point is that there's so much that is on the line for these people as they're trying to rebuild. And this is pretty much all over. And you can imagine Syria in the same place where people have a chance to come back to their homes. Same situation. It's pretty much a global condition. So we, and when I speak of we in this context, it's going to be about anybody who's involved in the rebuilding, in the reconstruction. So that would be the national government, ministry, might have a Ministry of Reconstruction. It might be local government. They might have development offices or representatives of the Ministry of Reconstruction. They might have people who are working with returnees, so people who are refugees or displaced internally. But it also could be local organizations, local Red Cross. And it could be, of course, international organizations, the United Nations. It might be non-governmental organizations. So all of this effort is in support of this recovery. How do we recover? Well, guess what we do under these circumstances? We go back, we rebuild, we reconstruct, we basically revert to the systems that were in place before the war. In essence, creating a lot of those same divisions that were in society that we had before the war, that precipitated the war. And this is a generalization. So there's some of the systems, may have been functioning, but for a large part, what we do is we do things like, we often want to create an interim government, because especially in countries where the government is either up in the air because it's been a war and there's no actual winner, or there's a peace agreement but the political parties are dispersed. What we might do is, I call it the gang of thugs. We take the baddest asses, all the people who are fighting the war, the worst rebel groups. This is what happened in Liberia and a number of other places. And we put them in positions of authority and create this little structure of interim government. So, and the reason is that, if there's a spoiler out there, somebody who isn't a part of this, they're going to destroy this interim government. So you bring all these bad leaders together, and they care about government. They care about what they can get out of this interim period before the elections happen, and taking for what they can personally. Again, exaggeration, but this is kind of how it goes. So that's the interim government. And then we have early elections, right? Because we've got to get a democracy going, and so we have early elections. Well, who were party to the elections? It's the old parties that were party to the war. So the old, political parties. So they've already been fighting over time. They come back in, and we reconstruct the same political system. So then we look at the environment. A lot of wars are fought or at least exacerbated by poor resources, lack of good sustainable practices in agriculture, in land management, in forest management. And so there's fighting over the limited resources. So what do we do but go back to those same practices? And people that are struggling, again, to make a living. They're struggling to find a place where they can cut out their little space where they can have a field and grow whatever they're growing, and have basic, enough food for your family, let alone to be able to trade it and sell it. So then we do other things like school curriculums. We say, well, kids got to go back to school. They've been out of school because of the war. Nobody has school during war. We need to build schools. Let's get kids back into school. And so we have the same biased curriculum that weighs one ethnic group over another ethnic group, and we start all over again. So these kinds of the systems that we're getting back into, having just finished a war and we're building back in those same methodologies. So, surprise. Does it last? Doesn't last. We have, I think it's 80% of all the wars in this millennium have been rekindled from the last millennium. When I first started my work in the early 90s on this subject, I just got inspired by the fact that almost 50% of all wars restarted after within 5 years of it ending. And I said, God, we've got to find a better way to do this. We've got to find a way to be able to reduce that. And it's not quite that high a number, but it's still pretty high today. So they don't last. There's been some pretty good reflection over the years, but the problem is that we're not looking at it holistically. We are not looking at it from a position of, whoa, let's look at the entire system. Let's look at the international aid system. Let's look at the governance structures that we have. Let's look at how these things relate to each other. We're looking at it very much from a within the construct kind of a thing. So it's sort of reductionist kind of approach. We go at it by problem solving. In fact, problem solving. So you say, Sudan, for example, there's a lot of issues where cattle are migrating. They go from the wetlands, and then in the dry season they move and migrate up to the wetlands. Well, in between are farming areas, and the cattle often are pushed through these farming areas, and fighting ensues because there's ruinous farms, but also competition over the water sources. So we say, oh, well, there's not enough water, let's build a well. So we dig boreholes to try and have more water so this can be distributed. Problem, not enough water. Answer, dig a borehole. We have problems with poaching timber. And this is quite a big thing, especially in West Africa. Poaching timber where nobody's looking, pay somebody off, you can bring in this big timber, you can sell it overseas, especially to Asia, and you're gonna make a lot of money off of it. So that's the problem. What's the solution? Anybody wanna guess? More policing. So what we do is we put people in there to sort of manage this. Well, what do you think happens with that? People get corrupted. They get invited to, if you look this way, I'll give you some money. We'll take out these logs. You won't know the difference. But also it just sets up tension. So now you have the people who are trying to live within the forest area, maybe even just getting firewood. You have the poachers, often outsiders. You have the police, and there's again setting up divisions. So we tend to look at it from a very reductionist sort of problem-solving, short-term perspective, and this gets into this, so the immediacy of the issues. You have initially humanitarian assistance, which goes in there to save lives and bring in food and shelter and health care, but just very short term. Then you have your long-term development, which is the long-term agriculture, perhaps the school system and redeveloping teacher training, that sort of thing. In between, you've got this war place, this transition where this country is trying to get just off of its feet and into a place of sustainability and maybe some long-term peace, maybe some democracy, maybe some systems that are working. And when we go back to trying to just re-establish what already existed, you can see the problems there. And that's why a lot of wars come back over and over and over again. Different characters sometimes, same war. So, especially things like if we, in the example I just gave about building a well, when you introduce resources into a resource scarce environment, there's going to be competition over it. So if we were to, in the case of Sudan, we have cattle coming up in certain areas and running into the farmlands and the water competition, you build a well, there's only going to be more competition and fighting over that resource. And in parts of Africa where the lakes are drying up because of climate change and various other issues, more and more people are coming into fewer and fewer acres around the water source, and more fighting happens. So when we introduce resources, it becomes even more problematic in those kinds of contexts. So I'm not saying that all of this is bad. I mean, we have done some good. There's been a number of good things. A lot of lives have been saved. There's a lot of, you know, especially in the healthcare realm, or in the long-term kind of things, malaria, polio, just healthcare in general has risen significantly over the past 15 years. So there's some good, especially in that long-term development of humanitarian assistance. It's that interim space that's a lot harder. So we have, you know, we collectively, those of us who work in this context, have said, well, how do we do this better? What can we be learning of this? You know, this lecture series. What can we learn from the past? And we say, well, we have learned about rebuilding on old structures. That's not a good idea. But even more so is this whole futuristic. Where are we going as a globe right now? There is so much change happening in our societies that the old structures are just not relevant. That a lot of the ways that we've held elections in the past are not necessarily useful. This kind of, this sense that there's a global transition taking place, anybody reading any material about this, how we're, number of people trying to look at the world in terms of actual one massive global change. We call it the Great Change or the massive transition. Anyway, that kind of a thinking of, we are all interrelated. When a Syrian refugee leaves their home, it affects us right here. More and more so, that kind of globalized, big picture thinking is where people are heading. And so as you look at wars, you have to say, we need to get into that basket. We need to be thinking at that high level. So let's look at what this old paradigm looks like. This is what we've been talking about. It comes from a place of let's tell you what to do. It's directive. It comes from an end in and of itself that we're trying to get to. It's aid-centric. It's these things that we've been talking about. A lot of the systems in rebuilding are based on sectors. Like you have the health sector, you have food distribution, you have education, you have psychosocial, which is dealing with trauma, and so forth. And they tend to work in isolation of each other. So they're disconnected from each other. Again, it's just this point that it's really unsystemic. So who in here reads Chinese? Anybody? Well, that's good because this apparently is actually wrong. But this is the old crisis equals danger plus opportunity. Although I understand that Chinese speakers would say, well, that's not exactly what it says. But this is where it gets exciting, because we have the opportunity to do something entirely new. When we have a break, When you have a break, you have the opportunity to do something totally new. If you were to get a divorce, you can build your life all over. If you're to move, you can start an entire new job. If you're to, and one might say, dare I say, in this situation we're in our country, right now, this could be considered a pretty large break from the past. This builds the possibilities. This is like huge. And when you have a devastation, something like a war, there's almost no better starting point. You're getting rid of the status quo, those systems that don't work. And we are saying, what do we want? What do we want our society to look like? What do we want our village to look like? What do we want our relationship with the land to look like? And we have this opportunity at this point. There's the understandable, we just want to get back to safety. We just don't want any more fighting. I just want food. I just want to make sure that my children are okay. So there's that understandable space of needing to be safe and secure. And there's this untapped possibility of lots of new, creative, innovative, unthought of space that we have not stepped into. What can we do now in this new place of ours? So that's where I'd like to lead. So in this context, we want to look at not what has been, but what could be. And when you're looking at this, especially from today's really interrelated world in which everything affects everything else, we want to really take a big picture here. So we want to make sure that, for example, our healthcare system is balanced and integrated with how we deal with our land. Because our health has everything to do with our agriculture. It's everything to do with how we use our water sources and our minerals and so forth. So we need to be taking these steps back, and this is where we get into what could be, and not a lot of what happens in today's world. So I want to offer you a new paradigm, which is based on this larger context. So big picture, we're starting big picture. We're looking at, let's just say even the entire country, and you can use Ivory Coast again as an example. Asset based, meaning instead of coming in and saying, what's your problem? What's your problem? What's your problem? We say, what do we have? I've used this quite a bit in villages where we go through a process in which villagers look at what they have. So even in this one we were just looking at, you could say, hey, we have 30 people who've returned. We have a stream nearby. We have our traditional birth assistant who's come back with us. So we have some medical care. We have some elders with wisdom. We have some structures that haven't been destroyed. We look at it from an asset-based approach, and then we say, what do we want to look like? What is that vision of this community that we want to look at? What do we want to look like in the future? And we say, well, we want to be food self-sufficient. So we want to have enough land that we can feed the people that we have. We want to have a marketplace nearby so that we can bring our excess food to market and trade for other goods. We want to have good relationships with our neighbors so that we know that we're safe, and so forth. So we designed this new structure, and we say, what is this what's the world we want to be living in? We want to be connected with our government. We want to be able to ask for things from our government. We want them to be able to respond. It's engaging of all people in society, and there's all of those who want to be engaged. So it doesn't leave out big chunks of people, particularly if it's a religion or an ethnic group. It's generative. It elicits ideas rather than being directive and saying, here's what we're going to do. Here's how you go about doing this. Here's how you start schools. Here's how you write a constitution. It elicits from culture, from the wisdom of the community, and process is just as much a piece of it as the product end itself. So how we go about it, how we make decisions, are just as critical as the decision that's made. And it's interrelated. So again, the schools, there's work with the land system, with agriculture, and the healthcare system works with the school system. And then it's partnership instead of it being coming from a place of big northern hemisphere countries coming down and saying, here, have aid, we're giving you aid. It's a partnership in divining what happens next in this country or this village. And people bring all their skills and their capabilities and resources together. And so you can get the sense, you get the feel for this being quite a different relationship. It's quite a different relationship to the people, it's relationship to what they have, it's relationship to each other. And this is, there's elements of this currently going on. There's definitely signs of it coming to life, but it is not part of our structure as when we work in war-torn communities. For the most part, this is pretty relatively limited. Okay. Oh, and I just wanted to say, one piece of this is that the environment is one of those elements, like health, and those are probably the two biggest ones, that link everybody. When the environment suffers, everybody suffers. And if you can look at healthcare as people care about a hurt or a starving child. That boy from Syria, when people looked at that and it went viral, there was a lot of outcry. Health is really one of those interconnecting things. Everybody needs health. You could actually say food as well, but environment is increasingly so. And as we become more and more of the effects of, aware of the effects of on ourselves and our livelihoods, and we see people migrating, leaving their countries because their environment can no longer sustain them, we're recognizing how this interplays. So there's this larger sense of how environment plays a role in all of us seeing the world from a higher perspective, and I think the climate change issues is a great example of that. Okay, are there any questions at this point? Well, we'll have questions and answers afterwards, but just in terms of this element of it.
So you're saying this model that's new doesn't create more division, whereas the old model sustained division.
Yes. So the question is this old model sustain divisions, and this new model, I'll just say, is better at not recreating old divisions, but also using a divisive lens, a view of separation. Which ethnic group, which religion, which region, which school do you go to? That kind of divisiveness, it has, in and of itself, keeps people apart. So the idea behind this is that we're not looking at it from that vantage point. So it's a paradigm shift. And no doubt there will be divisions, but the idea is that this larger perspective and ability to see the interrelationships between us and act on them and design systems that way is less divisive. Makes sense, yeah.
So the people who have this ability to theoretically look at this big picture are usually people who aren't who aren't experiencing famine, correct? So how do you keep from imposing this kind of like your idea or of what you think a larger picture is from imposing that idea on somebody else? Because it seems like you could just create another, like a paradigm shift that kind of recreates a different authoritative structure that we have right now.
Yeah, great, because that's where I'd like to take this. In fact, we're going to just go through a little bit. Let's go back to that because that's kind of the essence of what I'm hoping to get to. And I think it's very relevant to our situation today in this country as well as war-torn countries. Any other clarifying questions right now? And then we're going to open it up in just a minute. Yeah.
Was the war on the Ivory Coast two sort of factions? Was that religious? Was that religion based? How two ethnic groups came to argue over power? Was it religious nature?
To the background and what sort of were the fundamental factors behind the war?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
The question I guess is just, even if you put all these structures in place, actually, the same ideologies are still going to be present. Just like, so you can have all the same systems, have all new systems that address all those things, but the ideologies that started the conflict are still going to exist. So it would seem that down the line, it wouldn't solve the conflict, right?
It is the first step.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of just the first step.
But just like how we also address the ideology.
Behind the fact, so what is it that precipitated the war and how does this change some of those fundamental factors? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, so in the Ivory Coast there was there's ethnic divisions which go partly along religious lines, the northern part being Muslim, the southern part being fundamentally Christian. But there's a lot of people who've come from other countries, primarily Mali, who have come into the country as workers. There's a lot of cocoa. I think it's 80% of the world's cocoa comes or came from Ivory Coast. So they needed more workers, so people came in, and then over the years, in fact over the generations, weren't given status, so they couldn't own land and become land owners and generate their own cocoa farms and so forth. So there's some of these tensions have grown over time. I'll just add to that a little bit, and then we'll finish this, and then we'll come back to this because essentially the factors. Everybody needs everybody else. You can't have cocoa production without outside workers. You couldn't have done that in the past. It needed people to grow. So again, why are we looking at this as a divisive context when in fact it really is a pool of resources, landowners, workers, people extremely skilled and productive in the working. And looking at this as a place from how do we make this work? So there's a lot of things that are put on the table, and some of them are actually trying to be used today about new land ownership laws that allows people who produce cocoa based on their production to not only own land but also work together in sort of cooperatives so that people can all jointly gain from it. And the more cocoa is produced, the more everybody gains. So taking that step back from who's the landowner, who's the worker, where did you come from, what's your religion, and saying, hey, how do we all benefit from this cocoa production and make more of it and ostensibly sell it overseas? But some of that's what's being considered with land rights, some of the business practices, some of the trade, and some just policies within the countries. So that's just one example. Let me just finish this, and then we'll turn on the lights again, and we can just have a rallying discussion. I just want to go back to our village and give you some examples here about what this is looking like. So you're back in your village, and it's 2016. So just a few months ago, and this is you and a bunch of women who around the country are organizing to change land ownership laws, which in the past has reduced the ability of women to inherit land. So this is a nationwide process that the government is supporting, starting at a grassroots where people are organizing amongst themselves to have input into what the land should be like, land ownership rights. A bunch of villages have gotten together with villages from other neighboring villages in the region, and they're talking about how to rebuild the roads and some of the bridges that have been blown up. There's not a lot of money coming from the government at the moment, but they figure that they can do some of this work themselves, and in the process, perhaps create a new market, which would draw people from other parts to come to their market. So they're sitting together collectively thinking about what this would look like and how they're going to get the resources and put this together. Some of the youth have decided that they want to build a community center because we need a place to have these kinds of meetings. Instead of under trees, let's have a community center. So they're actually getting their own wood and building this spot. Back over here was your house, so back kind of behind there was your house. And so they're building this new open space and just building it on their own as a support to the community. It gives them something to do, it unifies them from their experiences, whether they were refugees or stayed inside the country. There's some good agricultural initiatives that's taken forth. Taken place. There's somebody came up around with the idea of rabbits, and so there's a little production of rabbits going on, but there's also a product chain that goes from the production of rabbits with this young man to selling them distribute them a little bit further away in the big city to selling them in the main capital. So there's a chain including transportation, middle people who do the trade and so forth. So it's generating income and connections across the country. There's been some initiatives on water and how to draw from some of the natural resources and springs that are up the hill a little ways, and have safe water for everybody. This came from one of the visioning processes that the community had been in, and they said that's one of the things we need, and so they made it happen with the help of some aid. And then down the road, there's just behind the marketplace is a dance going on. This is not Côte d'Ivoire, but there's a celebratory dance going on, and people have come out there hooping and hollering and having a good time, and you're hoping that you can get out of your meeting pretty soon so you can come in and participate and have a celebration. So the idea is this is not utopia. It's not the end, but it is. It does give us some ways to look at the past and say, how do we do this better in the future? Okay. So I think getting to your question is really apropos, because what we're trying to do is not just, you know, as we are tending to do, I think, in this country, is to say, let's just, you're not good, let's just replace us. Maybe she just stays up there. Let's just replace, we want to replace you with our ideas, because we're better, we've got better ideas, we're just going to replace you. But the systems stay the same, right? And that's kind of what's happening here. Same thing here, and I think, if I got you right, that was your question, is you could just take this new paradigm and say, well, this new paradigm's better, and we're right, and then somebody else is going to come along with a new paradigm and just replace that. Is that kind of what you were suggesting?
Not exactly. I was kind of thinking about the debate between the concept of like international rights or human rights, and who's kind of created those, and how they how certain values, when you try and create one like international view on something, how certain values can kind of be like left to the side, or not, like, you know, one person is creating that holistic view that you're talking about, that like universal global view. And
Right.
who is it? Like, not everybody's involved in that, especially if you're, you know, your country, you know, if you have 65 million refugees right now, half of them are kids. It's like those people are not involved in making those decisions and what that global context looks like right now, like directly. So
That's the invitation, is to be involved. And it can happen through lots of different ways. So it isn't about, with this paradigm, it isn't about internationals coming in and saying, okay, you as a country, here's how you need to do something. It's about saying, working with people, again, the partnership thing. This is not, this is one of the problems, is when it is the Northern Hemisphere telling the Southern Hemisphere what to do, and creating the programs and the systems and how you write a constitution and all these things that kind of dictate out. It's about eliciting from the ground up. So for example, in Sierra Leone, and actually in Tunisia, well, different kind of context, but they had a national dialogue, which was getting down to the most basic, you know, villages, to these local villages where people can participate, and lots of different issues that they could work on, lots of different designs and questions. But it's from the ground up. And so this is happening all over the place. In Tunisia, which is the start of the Arab Spring, and they're struggling with, suddenly they have this revolution, but it isn't these young, you know, striking young people who are now coming to the fore. You have the Salafi extremists, more extreme Islamic-based people rising up as well, saying, hey, we want some space in there. So there was some really pretty impressive like town hall meetings where you had a spectrum of all kinds of people giving voice to what they want there, in that case, the university, and sort of the city around it, what they wanted to see happen there. So it can happen from the ground up. It can happen within a village. It can happen within a school system or a healthcare system. But the idea is that it elicits from people, what do we want? What do we want our world to look like? What do we want our country to look like? Rather than it coming from the top down, as somebody's saying. If that makes sense.
Yeah, to speak to that exactly, they use this exact little like big picture circle in my community environmental planning. We use it here in the United States right now to plan our cities. So it makes total sense. And what's beautiful about it is that it's just a framework, and you can place whatever values your community wants within that framework. It doesn't have, it's not going in and being like, this is right and this is wrong. It's going in and being like, how do you want, like, what is right and wrong to you? How is it in your community? And I think it's a great system. It works really well.
It comes from the bottom, and it also is in recognition of the interrelationships. Because one of the things that we tend to do is get into this, is just about and in this case, a program. You know, I've got this healthcare program to, what do they call it, WASH program about hand washing. We want everybody in the country to be washing their hands. We can do this massive hand washing program, and we don't even recognize how it fits with working with the healthcare structure or the water systems in the country. I mean, it's that kind of interrelationship, and that's why you have to look at it from the big perspective and generate ideas from down below. It's a complex idea. Yeah.
I'm curious about, talking about this is not a top-down approach. How do you impart this sort of collaborative approach to the governance without perpetuating the colonial narrative about coming in and telling you what's right and what's wrong? So I think that's where I'm getting caught up, is the actual deliverance of this. That's not, how do you keep it from coming from this part of the world, this part of the world, and perpetuating that narrative?
Yeah. It's sort of like it's sort of like saying, I don't have the answers, but I'm willing to work with you. And in fact, it may not be me who's the right person to be working with you. It could be somebody else. And it could be completely within your structure. You do this yourself. So this isn't coming, I mean, here I am, a white woman from Northern Hemisphere, and I work in these countries. But a lot of this stuff happens within the country itself, or within the region, or from one country to another country. And so it doesn't happen to have to happen this way. But I think the shift that we're making in society writ large, and I mean global society, is we are moving from this place of seeing our worlds as separate entities to recognizing this interrelationship, and we're just barely stepping into that recognition. As when we do, that's when we become real partners. At one point, I met this woman from, I was at a conference in Democratic Republic of Congo, which is the most war-ridden place on earth. Rapes are just rampant. It's just totally destroyed part of the world. She was not only a woman, not only from there, but she was also handicapped. And I was in this group conference with her, and she just blew my mind. She got it. She knew better than I did by a long shot how much it's the partnership. We bring what we have to the table. It's not about me saying, and that's the whole point of Spirit, not about me saying what you need to do. It's about us working together with what we have, including the fact that we come from different places, including the fact that we might have different religions. It's a new space that we're just stepping into globally, and that's why I'm introducing it in this really hard kind of a context. Yeah.
So, would you say that there's a prioritization of cultural traditions, even if they might get in the way of some of the processes you're trying to make in like a small village or area that's...
So what kind of division?
Just like, is there a prioritization of culture, like while you're trying to rebuild these communities? Like say they believe in certain things that might get in the way of this rehabilitation. Do you work with that, or do you tell them that they've got to work around what you want to do?
And you mean prioritization of what to work on first?
What they believe in, does that come first, or does rebuilding the community?
Well, in this new paradigm, they have, it's their world. They have the say. They get to say. Usually, there's a pattern to it though, which is safety first. So the question is there prioritize? If I'm getting it right, there's what if people in the community have their own priorities, And I'd suggest that maybe somebody else, like myself or somebody, would have different priorities. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, this is their world. I mean, this is their opportunity to step in and say what they want. I mean, this is, and how they want to do it. What do we want to do? I mean, I've seen in a program that works off of this model called community-driven development, which is the communities decide what they want. They have this plan, they create this vision, and they say, this is our first priority, and totally war-destroyed community said, we want to build a community center. And, you know, wait, don't you want, like, your houses? Don't you want, you know, your healthcare structure? No, but because they said that we want to be able to come together. We have to come together. We have to make decisions. We need a place where we can make decisions first. Then we can do all this other stuff. Absolutely. It's not, who am I to say what their priorities are? And I'll just say there generally is steps to that, which is usually safety first. That, you know, if you're not secure, if you don't have some form of food, you don't think you're going to live, and your family's going to live for the next, you know, few weeks, you're probably not going to, you know, that's where you start. Most people start there.
I mean, like, say they don't believe that women in the community should be allowed to like work or be educated, but that's a portion of the community that you need, you know, to help with the process. Do you work with that, or you tell them no, women need to be allowed to be educated and be able to work?
I might throw that back at you, but I would say, in my view, and this is of course the, you know, as we watched Afghanistan over the last decades, is, you know, girls' education, where there's a lot of people say, no, girls should not be educated. And this is just my personal view, but I'm using this paradigm. I would say, working in partnership, we're working with the war-torn countries want, and they prioritizing because it's their place and they're rebuilding. And we are in partnership with them, so we're not a slave to anything. So we, as we're going, we're also interfacing and bringing what we bring to the table, which is possibly ideas, exposure, and so forth. But it's up to them to make their call. And I know there's people, I have colleagues who would disagree with me on that one. And there's probably people in this room who disagree with me.
Would it be beneficial to show them how other successful countries have formed their constitutions, or their history, and how they've become productive or successful?
Yeah, so the question is, what about showing other people how they, like giving them examples of how they built the Constitution?
Let
Or
them take what they think is important.
Yeah.
That isn't important.
Yeah.
To show an example of what worked for some people.
Yeah. So giving examples is one of my favorite things. One is, especially if it means travel. So somebody gets to move to, I mean, it might be to another region within the country, but it might be to another country where they get to watch how something that's working for these people works, and they can bring that back. And so I was in South Sudan, which is the newest country in the world. They got their independence, and I was there the first day that they had the parliament. And so all these people all dressed up in beautiful clothes, and you know, I'm going and talking to all kinds of people. They're so excited. One guy's walking around with the Canadian Constitution under his arm. And so I went up to him, I said, well, what's that about? And he goes, we don't know how to write a constitution. Might as well use a good example. Yeah. So I mean, I love that, because the cross-exchanging, and then the relationships get built. And again, that's part of what we're trying to do.
So it seems like this sort of ground up thinking could be beneficial to a lot of different types of institutions.
I'm not hearing it. Sorry.
Okay, I'll start over. So I said it seems like this type of ground up thinking could be beneficial to a lot of different institutions or problem solving sort of like situations. An example would be conservation or environmental problem solving. But my question is, how can we promote this type of thinking without having to have sort of like a crisis or complete failure of the system, or is that necessary?
Yeah, okay. So the question is, this could be useful in things like conservation, but why do we have to have like a major war in order to start from from scratch. And I don't think we have to. It's just when we are starting from scratch and we have everything else is gone, it's an opportunity. It's an opening that we don't have a status quo to pull off. It's, it's the big ship, incrementally little stuff. This is what happened in our country, and all of a sudden we've got a new president who's going, whew, he's moving things over here, and it's creating more opportunities, however you want to play them out, than we've had in a long time to do something different. And so war just happens to be probably the most extreme, starting from scratch. Yeah.
So in Montana's landscape today, we've for a long time had a very black and white division of opinions on things. In the last decade, we've tried very hard to start from the government level collaboration process. And the word collaboration has become the new battleground because people who resist giving up their old ways immediately say, you're collaborating like the Vichy collaborated with the Nazis. And that's in print, I'm not making that up. But the idea that working together itself is a destructive process is the first tool that people use to keep the battle going. How do you move people into accepting the idea that collaboration is not surrender?
How do you move people from the point of saying collaboration is not surrender? Well, I would say that just by even putting it in those words, we're already starting from an us and them perspective. So this is the challenge. I think, especially in your lifetimes, this is the challenge for us, is for us to move beyond the us and thems. And our political system is a perfect example, is when we can collectively, instead of collaboratively, but collectively recognize our interdependence and our relationships with each other and how what we do does affect each other, that's when we get beyond that. There's no such, it's an oxymoron to say that's a forced dialogue, because I'm pushing my agenda on you and you're supposed to be accepting my paradigm. And it doesn't work that way. So we have to move again. We cannot be just replacing somebody else's idea with our idea in the same system, or we're just going to continue to do this. We've got to look at this as an interconnected, interrelated, global system. And as we take that down to smaller and smaller entities, to the village level, we're still looking at ourselves as interrelated, interdependent on each other. And so it's about trying to push that, trying to suggest a different platform. And it's nuanced, it's difficult, but we are just beginning to step into that. And you see elements of this in different fields where they actually are doing that. Something called collective impact is doing that actually quite well.
Have you seen any success on this paradigm at all?
Is it what?
Have you seen any success on this paradigm? Like,
Yeah.
rather than just kind of going into a village and saying, hey, this is what I think we should do. Have you seen actual success?
Yes, there's been successes. Not, I wouldn't say country, although Tunisia is not doing too poorly. I mean, there's some of the examples of elements of this are things like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission back in South Africa. They really started. They built the gold standard for Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, and a number of countries, many countries have done that, where they've said, hey, we need to talk about what happened. Let's bring this up so it's not just this hidden war that we just want, like Rwanda. Just, ooh, that never happened, let's just move on, because that doesn't work. So it's Truth and Reconciliation are an excellent example of pulling things up, talking about it, recognizing how we have to build back together. We have to do this from a higher sphere. So that's one. Tunisia has really done a number of things. The way they've written their constitution has been, I mean, it's definitely not perfect, but they have been embracing of many people from a large perspective, and it's been relatively successful so far. in the Arab Springs. Should we just do, should we do two more? Just do one there. Yeah.
In the partnership, do you see more success more village partnerships, or are there different challenges between, like, let's say, building partnerships between rural villages and urban centers? So having different priorities after post-war recovery?
Urban and rural, different priorities.
Yeah, and how you might, because I imagine that you want to look at, like, maybe in the United States, you're going to see that cities are going to have different priorities than, more agricultural lands, but they're going to have a bigger say sometimes. Do you see a challenge with that?
Yeah, so priorities between urban and rural and who has the say over. Yeah, definitely, and particularly because the world is 50% now urban, right, and only becoming more so. And the need for, as we're still living in this economic world of exchange of money instead of goods, is it definitely will come into play. So again, you can take, I've seen some of this work done in this community-driven, community-based, which is like high-rise, pretty much slum type of housing in inner cities, and they've taken that as their own community and make their own decisions about what they want to do, what their needs are. So again, it's like a community level, you can have town level, you can have regional levels, you can do that. And you're making a say over what what's part of your life. So in the big picture, just like here, I mean, people from the urban areas have something to say about how the Park Service runs its parks, and it affects us in Montana, it may not affect them directly. So that national dialogue about what kind of a country do we want to live in and what that looks like, how do we deal with our lands, how do we do land ownership and all that kind of stuff, they might have some say in, but it's at this level. And more or less, people have a say over what is in their purview. Yeah, and it gets more diluted as you get bigger. Yeah.
I was wondering what particular anomaly you would say kind of triggers your intuition that there's going to be an impending paradigm shift, other than countries, repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, or is that just me?
Well, it's probably desire. I mean, so what triggers my intuition that we're moving towards this larger paradigm shift? It's desire. I think it's demand. I think it's need. I think it's there's just a lot of people out there right now talking about a major shift to a higher level. Call it consciousness, but a higher level of operating. And this is across many, many, many fields, all fields. So I'm just kind of playing with that edge when it comes to war zones. But I have seen, and I have some colleagues who definitely, it doesn't take long to be working with the war-torn communities to recognize that the old system doesn't work. So we've done lots of reflection, and some of that's very good, but much of the reflection's been at here. Well, how do we do this better? How do we do this better? And there's a number of people over the years who's taken a step back and said, oh, it's not about this and this, it's about this. So there's more and more recognition on it. Yeah, but it's, I keep talking, and other people keep talking to me, and it's a good dialogue that's going on, so, yeah. Well, thank you very much.